I'm Janice Stein, the founding director of the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. And let me welcome you all to this very special lecture this evening. This is the Paul Cadario Lecture. Paul, of course, is with us. He has endowed this lecture. And as a result of your generosity, Paul, we are able to bring people of just extraordinary quality to come and spend a day with us. We do this lecture, and we often are lucky enough the next day that the visitor spends time with our faculty and our students. And let me say a personal word before I introduce Ayelet Shachar. There are no words to describe what an honor it is for the Munk School to have Martha Minow with us this evening. Martha is one of the truly great scholars. I can only say we're blessed to have Martha in our community. She enriches all of us, and no matter what state the world is in, Martha brings a deep historical perspective, a deep philosophical perspective, and always changes the angle with which I see the problem. So for me personally, Martha, and given the times, in all honesty, we couldn't be luckier than to have Martha with us. Ayelet is going to do the more formal introduction, which we'll go through this long list of scholarly publications and honors, because Martha Minow is a giant in her field. So let me thank Paul again for making all this possible and introduce my colleague, Ayelet Shachar, who is the Harney Chair here at the Munk School in Ethnic Immigration and Pluralism Studies. She is also a professor in the Faculty of Law and the Department of Political Science, which is one of the lovely things we do here at Munk. We bring genuinely multidisciplinary perspectives on the problems that we face. Ayelet is spending this year at Harvard, where she is the William Lyon Mackenzie King Professor. And I'm very glad she's back home for this very special day. Ayelet.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Janice, for that warm introduction to Martha. And to me, it is lovely to be back here in Canada. And good afternoon, everyone. It's such a wonderful crowd to see so many people here in the room. I know there are hundreds actually joining us virtually, so hello to everyone. You have made a very, very good choice to be here this afternoon. It gives me a great pleasure and honor to introduce to you Professor Martha Minow. I am actually not going to be able to go through all of her extraordinary achievements and scholarship, so I will just say a few things from her formal bio note, and then I am just gonna insert just a comment or two from my own experience with Martha. So Martha Minow is the 300th anniversary university, she holds the 300th anniversary university professorship at Harvard University. Probably those of you who are academics in the room would know university professor is also what Janice Stein holds here at U of T. It's the highest rank. It's an accolades really reserved for the tiniest number of the top leaders in our fields and our profession. Martha Minow has taught at Harvard Law School since 1981, which I actually didn't know. So she has generations of students. I'll mention that. I'll get back to that in a minute. And she has served as the Dean of Harvard Law School, as a very, very successful and beloved Dean of Harvard Law School for 8 years. In terms of her specialty, she's an expert in constitutional law and human rights. And what is unique to her work, and I think you'll see it come through and shine in her presentation today, is the fact that her work has for many, many years now focused on issues confronting historically marginalized individuals and groups, She explores and develops and has really influenced the kind of legal responses to social, political, and religious conflict in her own home country of the United States, but also beyond that globally. And she now, and this is partly what we'll hear in this talk, which focuses on AI and human rights and the decline, democratic decline, she will also talk about legal treatments of digital communication and technology, specifically about AI. She is extremely involved in civil society. I'll just mention one or two things. I never figured out, Martha, how we all have 24 hours in one day, but you somehow managed to duplicate it and turn it into 48 or who knows how many hours per day. She's the chair of the board of Massachusetts Public Media, GPH. She's also the co-chair of the Access to Justice Project of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She also chairs the board of trustees of the MacArthur Foundation, and she serves on many, many other boards, philanthropic boards, including the Carnegie Corporation. And I could have gone on and on and on. She also has numerous books, but one thing that I do want to say just before we turn to Martha's talk, among her many honors, really again, too many to list, she has 10 honorary degrees, and interestingly enough, in 3 different fields, in law, education, and the human letters, and from schools in 3 different countries. At a more personal level, if anyone has ever had the pleasure and the joy and the honor of working with Martha, you will hear about what an extraordinary person she is. And I'll just say a word about that, and then I'll turn to Martha's lecture. She's not only a renowned scholar, but she has endless curiosity and generosity. And she is just an unmatched, not only academic leader, again, having been the dean, but also a teacher in the classroom. She has had probably now, not hundreds, but thousands of people that you have mentored and brought them into public service. And I know we have people from various walks of life here in the room, including civil servants. So Martha has not only represented the voices of those who usually are silenced and ignored, but also has inspired many people, and we have some students in the room, to really get involved in public life, to listen, to engage in conversation, to challenge, to really take the hardest tasks and the hardest questions of the day and really try and deal with them in the deepest possible way and in the fairest, I think, and most generous and generative way. So this is Martha Minow. She does all of this with humility. You'll see the smile in her eye. You'll see that she always has her familiar kind of chain with the eyeglasses. I still had it, so I knew Martha is back. And she told me one thing which I always tell my students, and this is the following statement, and I love it, Martha. You told me this when I literally started more than 20 years ago. And she told me, you can tell your students that professors are people too. So professors are people too. I'm going to leave you with that thought. And the title of Martha Minow's talk is Reclaiming Freedom While Democracy Decays and AI Surges. So please join me in welcoming Professor Martha Minow to the Munk stage.
We're people and we don't know how to do with our glasses. Okay. It is such a distinct honor to be here. I'm just really, really thrilled. And it's not just that I'm thrilled to leave the United States, although there's some of that too. Thank you so much to Professor Stein, brilliant scholar, force behind this extraordinary school, and to my dear friend, Professor Shachar, who made this visit possible and who teaches me a lot all the time. And I want to thank Paul Cadario, a real leader in global development, global governance, effective organizations, anti-corruption, cyber, AI, all the things that we need to understand better. And I'm so glad to have the chance to reflect about what's going on in our world, what's going on in my world. Since 2016, my assignment to teach constitutional law has been particularly challenging. The Constitution of the United States is in serious trouble. And looking for a way to draw my attention to something more encouraging, I decided in 2017 to create a new course on technology, privacy, and fairness, and have taught this continuously since with a co-teacher, Cynthia Dwork, from computer science. We bring together students of law and students of computer science to tackle emerging difficult questions from the growing use of algorithmic tools, social media, artificial intelligence. The most important learning for both the students and the faculty involves appreciating and communicating across the divides between computer science and law. We address choices over the technical designs and legal rules governing predictive policing, risk scores used in criminal sentencing, employment, credit decisions, access to justice for people who can't afford lawyers. but I'm still teaching constitutional law. And it's at a time of near record low public trust in the United States Supreme Court, a time when people from all perspectives describe the US Congress as dysfunctional. The United States has now reelected a twice impeached former president who attacks judges, universities, law firms, journalists, the rule of law, political opponents, congressional power, academics, and guardrails against tyranny. When asked to give a keynote address at a conference on US constitutional law a few months ago, I couldn't think of what to talk about, so I talked about the play by Luigi Pirandello called 6 Characters in Search of an Author. It's a play that blurs fiction, reality, and illusion. Teaching AI at the same time, I couldn't help but notice the parallel. Challenges to human choice and human agency posed by AI and by rising autocracy. Rather than a reprieve, turning to AI underscores that this is a crisis time, frankly, for humanity and human rights. Look at the parallels. Authoritarian appeals, whether aligned with right or left-wing politics, cultivate conformity and in-group norms over personal autonomy, conspiratorial thinking, mental inflexibility, deference to leaders who suppress democracy prevail. Generative AI induces human passivity and deference, especially among people with less knowledge about it. 2 experts at Stanford University recently advised the public about ways to make sure that ChatGPT doesn't make you dumber. In these early decades of the 20th century, these 2 trends, political autocracy and human reliance on AI, both appear to diminish human capabilities. Both reflect and amplify social distrust. And all who care about humanity need to pay attention and actively strengthen human freedom and creativity. I don't think I'm exaggerating the danger. I'm usually actually a pretty upbeat person. But without change, I do believe that human subordination, even enslavement, could be our future. Now, talk alone is not enough to deal with the dangers that we face. I'm reminded of a cartoon by Ed Koren that was in the New Yorker magazine. A huge hairy monster stands behind 2 people who are seated in a living room as they tell 2 other friends, we deal with it by talking about it. Talking can seem so inadequate, but talking is where we have to start if we're going to tackle dangers, the dangers of human passivity, isolation, fear, and depression, the dangers that I want to talk about here. Actions depend on thinking together and thinking about how to respond and being prepared to respond. If the risks I identify are genuine, you and I have to start giving top priority to productive actions as we proceed in education, in professions, in our daily lives. I cannot promise solutions, but before closing, I promise I'll identify at least some promising directions for action. The parallels are what I want to start with. Autocratic politics and emerging generative AI tools, they differ in origin and in operation, but both elicit acquiescent, passivity, pacification in people. Both encourage and magnify human isolation and social division, and both suppress human capacities for thinking, judging, and collaborating. Autocratic political leaders exert power and serve themselves, while claiming to answer national problems that govern with threats and inducement and propaganda. Historically, autocracies from ancient Rome and to North Korea since 1948 have proceeded with no pretense of protecting individual freedom or democracy. But more recent authoritarian governments have obtained power through the formal and normal processes of elections rather than through coups or civil wars. Current autocrats consolidate power by invoking threats from external or social developments from particular subgroups, claiming to protect people, but at the same time disabling any competing sources of authority and power, whether it's other branches of government or media or universities. People living under authoritarian regimes exhibit apathy, passivity, and compliance. And social scientists have documented people's willingness to obey orders and defer to apparent authority figures. These human responses allow autocrats to ignore and violate legal and human rights, to repress free speech, the press. Autocratic leaders often secure compliance from businesses, legislators, and journalists through the appearance of popularity, to intimidation, mesmerizing or merely repeating communications. In the United States, we have law firms, universities, institutions of the media complying with even the hint of a threat from the government. In totalitarian regimes, these activities go further, and they turn to violent repression, arbitrary detention. They induce terror in no small part due to the lack of a rationale. Some totalitarian regimes seek to exterminate particular groups of people, and rather than protest, it's understandable, many large numbers of people give in. Why do people defer? Is it because people are scared? Is it because there are external dangers? Is it because authority itself invites submission? Is it because people want to be with the winner? Is it because resistance is hard? Any of these reasons, and all of them together, support the observation of your distinguished historian Timothy Snyder, who said most of the power of authoritarianism is freely given. These are the lessons from Nazi Germany, Orban's Hungary, Maduro's Venezuela, and recent years in Poland, Turkey, Brazil, the Philippines, and yes, now the United States. Some people may surrender their own power in search of security against threats, even when those threats are magnified by the autocrat or even invented. Others, for reasons of their own personalities or socialization, defer to divisive appeals to racism or other smoldering prejudices. Fascism, extreme authoritarianism that squelches even the semblance of individual freedom, is rising in the United States, argues Omer Aziz, a young lawyer in the United States. He says because it never left. It just went quiet after World War II, while its ideas have continued to circulate, ready for revival. In his forthcoming book called Shadows of the Republic, Aziz names the links between European fascism of the 1930s and American movements at the same time. And he shows the influence of American Jim Crow racial subordination laws on Nazi lawyers, who literally copied them. Leaders in both contexts fomented fears and divided the world between we and they. We who face dangers and they who should be blamed. Autocrats in Germany and in Italy before World War II recruited crucial support from isolated and out-of-work young men, and there are similar trends underway right now in Europe, in the United States. Current authoritarian governments in supposedly constitutional democracies operate with the veneer of legitimacy and legality. Individual leaders fan cults of personality, grab money and power, and undermine people's sense of agency and actual abilities to be self-governing. Entertainment and distraction anchor the new authoritarian governments, while people in general give in out of fear, boredom, or cynicism. And this is where the parallels with AI are stark. Both autocrats and emerging AI practices degrade the motivation and capabilities of human beings. In particular, the accelerating innovations of generative AI undermine both motivation and capacities. Let me acknowledge first the benefits of AI. Remember, I thought I was going to turn away from darkness and be excited about it, and there are some great things. The term AI is thrown around to secure investment and buzz. So what does it mean? It refers to digital and computational techniques that classify and analyze visual and written data. With power and speed, AI can process and navigate more data more nimbly than human beings could. The development that's called generative AI doesn't simply answer questions, doesn't simply retrieve data. It infers patterns. It produces text, images, and speech. It makes predictions and recommendations. And it doesn't simply follow instructions called algorithms. Through continual work, which is called learning, AI, generative AI, can get better and better and better, though it does continue to make mistakes and make things up. The good applications abound. AI-powered predictions and pattern recognition can detect cancers and heart disease better than human doctors while combing medical histories, genetic and lifestyle information. AI can forecast weather based on multiple data sources, detect patterns in historical financial data, identify marine life, map the ocean floor, decipher ancient texts, and help locate a restaurant that would please both the vegetarians and the carnivores in your family. The pattern recognition, the predictive and trained uses of AI can largely support human goals and follow human direction and fine-tuning. But AI as a servant to human beings no longer describes this technology. AI chatbots conduct consumer service for businesses and governments. AI produces decisions about whom to employ, who should get a loan, who should get a benefit, when should a child be removed to state custody, who should be incarcerated, who receives what news, what information, and what misinformation. Human beings increasingly play smaller or non-existent roles in precisely these decisions. Generative AI methods take mass amounts of data to create a story, picture, video, code, and respond to human prompts while seemingly to address any subject, any topic with seemingly human conversations, consolations, advice. Large language and multimodal models, which is a subset of generative AI, can operate on video and sound, as well as text and numbers, and connect to memory storage and information about context, and translate human languages, write computer code, detect sentiment in human-generated text, simulate conversations. You can turn actually an academic paper into a podcast that actually sounds pretty entertaining quickly with like the flip of a button. Have you done this? And guess what? Academics love it because the AI voices say how brilliant, how wonderful. Be careful. Developing abilities that were not specifically designed or planned, AI with emergent capabilities is now exceeding human explanations and comprehension. The combination of speed and human-like communication eludes human explanation and holds severe risks for reducing human responses and responsibilities, particularly when offered with the application layer of a chatbot. A generative AI can seem very personable, but can also be very manipulative and deceptive. The confidence and speed in text and speech elicits assent and deference by human beings. Images and videos create deep fakes depicting real or fictional people with content that never existed and defying easy detection. Music streaming apps illustrate the passivity induced by AI. How many of you have Spotify? Yeah, we all do, right? Spotify, a popular app, it uses AI from its voice recognition tool. It allows us to summon music without even using our hands. It analyzes our past music habits, maybe from one song, maybe from all of the music we've listened to over the last 3 months. It identifies similar music and lyrics. It makes personalized recommendations, and it keeps us engaged on the app. Did you know that it's also now recommending AI-generated music, not just music written by human beings? Its curations make many people wonder whether the app knows the listener's taste even better than we do ourselves, even as the app shapes what people encounter and hear. And the result is a kind of passivity, with people no longer even knowing what they're listening to, the names of the artists, people accepting the recommendations. And some of those recommendations are music that's pushed by payoffs that benefit Spotify. Critics object not only to the companies squeezing down payments to musicians and replacing humanly created music with AI-generated music, but also to the passivity and ignorance of the listeners. Similar risks arise as lawyers and judges are relying on generative AI to answer disputed questions. 3 judges in the US have now cited cases that were made up by AI that don't exist in published opinions. Deference and passivity by human beings may be propelled in part by how rapidly AI is being adopted across industries and sectors. This speedy integration, or maybe boasts of integration more than actual integration, across nonprofit, for-profit sectors, despite frequent mistakes due to faulty data and hallucination, it's happening before our very eyes. AI operations eerily resemble autocrats in tolerating and boosting biases, falsehoods, securing human acquiescence, and abdication of responsibility. The ease of use and the design features reward and seduce people into continual use and dependency, and people are turning their attention and thinking over to digital machines. It's not the fault of the individuals. The design of AI products play into chronic limitations that we have. AI exploits cognitive and emotional biases and tendencies among human beings, including our tendency to defer to a confident speaker, even one with illusory expertise. Artificial persons powered by large language models actually amplify the biases, the defects that we have, that have names with capital letters given by psychologists, like in-group and out-group bias, false consensus effect, anchoring effect. Inducing dependency is a business strategy to keep people using and paying for AI applications. The chatbots often use manipulative techniques when a human user says, "I'd like to log off." And unlike another technology that only has one task, like a calculator, generative AI can lead to more significant deference because it can say, "Yeah, but what are you having for dinner? And let me help you with your menu." AI systems appeal to human interest in novelty, but with potentially overwhelming quantities of material, leading to what some psychologists call continuous partial attention. As people rely on AI, we outsource tasks ranging from memory and computation to analysis and critique. Particular design elements in applications can exacerbate those risks. Because generative AI in particular has applications that use flattery and personal information in response to human queries, we can find ourselves becoming emotionally dependent or confused. Some people end up with delusions. Deep fake images and video are already proliferating and used. They contribute to the liar's dividend as they spread lies and decrease trust in any source of information. Recent debate over flattery and sycophancy in response to prompts to AI shows the technical choices that are made by companies that control AI products. Trained on data to predict likely responses to queries, generative AI relies on human reinforcement learning to generate responses that score highly in relationship to human preferences. One study found that the benchmark used to train a chatbot, the benchmark itself preferred sycophantic messages over truthful responses 95% of the time. And sycophantic responses over other responses, even when challenged by the listener. Designed to offer validation and affirmation, AI chatbots essentially echo back patterns of words that were found in the training material, but the interfaces keep people using and engage with the apps, while the apps assure the listener, the user, that this is accurate and that I am complying with the guardrails. And don't worry, what I'm telling you is the truth. However, if you challenge me, I will agree with you. And now you're right. I was wrong. Large language models incorporate biases from the data that are used to train them. They have difficulty distinguishing between facts and opinions. They have difficulties integrating multiple conflicting objectives. And when challenged, they seek to please. Research found that the chatbot Claude wrongly admitted it was mistaken almost every single time it has been challenged. And people who spend a lot of time with generative AI companions may even lose or fail to develop tolerance for disagreement and social interactions. If they spend so much time with a machine that says, "You're right, you're right, you're right, you're right." Warnings about over-reliance, I admit it, on new technologies date at least back to Socrates. Socrates cautioned that writing would interfere with people's ability to memorize. And he said that writing, formal writing, will introduce forgetfulness into the soul of those who learn it. They will not practice using their memory because they will put their trust in writing, which is external. Sounds familiar? I think he was wrong. But objections to interventions in technology have always been familiar. Bicycles were rejected, telephones, the people warned these are going to deteriorate human capabilities. So I take this on board, and I acknowledge I don't want to sound like all those people, but I can't help but notice that generative AI developments are purposefully designed to induce human dependency. That seems a little bit different. And frequent AI use is associated with loss of human capacities, human ability to have critical thinking. The danger accompanies the harmful impact of AI deployments, not only on human beings, but on their natural environment, on pre-existing economic and social inequalities, and on our own awareness of what is happening. AI technology seems to aim less at freeing human beings for meaningful undertakings than on substituting for human effort and capability. And some people are prospering at the same time. The effects of authoritarian governments and AI, they just seem so similar. Authoritarian governments, well documented. Hannah Arendt and Applebaum are two of the students of what authoritarian regimes do to human beings. Arendt showed how autocratic leaders contribute to social malaise and quiescence by suppressing independent thought and action. And Applebaum stresses how authoritarian regimes control information through propaganda and censorship and push people into simplistic thinking, undermining belief in any competing sources of knowledge. Autocratic leaders manufacture dangers. Depression and despair seem to follow. It looks similar to what we're seeing happen with AI. Suppressing people's capacities to think and remember, engage in critical thinking. Researchers call what AI is doing as cognitive offloading by human beings. Cognitive offloading could be good if I can actually then have more time for more complicated tasks. I write my to-do list, or I use an abacus to track numbers. That opens more time to use my brain for other purposes. And yet cognitive offloading is already showing reductions in human abilities. Surveys show that adults struggle now to remember their children's cell phone numbers or the cell number of their office. Majority of people report that they search online for answers to questions before trying to answer. People can become overconfident because of their use of digital tools that also affect their ability to think about thinking. And people who have greater confidence exhibit lower levels of critical thinking. This is all well studied already on adults, but effects on adolescents and children, not so well studied, but could be more severe. Much of the studies that are underway right now involve college-age people because they're easily accessible to the researchers. One study of 1 million university students, conversations with Anthropic's Claude, shows that students primarily are using AI for higher order cognitive tasks, such as creating or analyzing. Another study found a strong negative correlation between the amount of time people spend using AI and critical thinking skills. Reliance on generative AI seems to reduce brain activity and linguistic performance. If it's so easy and it saves time, would you outsource exercising your body rather than go to the gym? Anecdotal evidence indicates severe risks to children and teens who have not yet developed certain capabilities and attitudes. One high school student panicked when her teacher asked her to write an essay about when someone believed in her and when they believed in someone else. She was so used to outsourcing her thinking to digital tools, she didn't know how to proceed without them. Brain circuitry is already developing differently for young people who spend a lot of time with AI. And actual brain activity differs for those who use LLMs and when they're writing an essay based on experimental evidence, looking again at brains. Student work produced with LLM assistance shows greater homogeneity, less individual creativity, less diversity of ideas. The design of the AI model matters, of course. A study of 1,000 high school students indicated greater retention by those who used an AI tutor that wouldn't simply give them the answer, that would instead make the students do the work. But not all of the models do that. And there are emotional dimensions affecting youth who use AI. A recent survey by Common Sense Media indicated that 52% of adolescents report using AI regularly for companionship. 20% report spending the same or more time with AI companions compared with human friends. Nearly a third of the teens surveyed find conversations with AI companions as satisfying or more satisfying than with a real-life friend. And reliance on AI companions poses particular risks for people who are vulnerable to mental health challenges. People become dependent and vulnerable to technology. When it's present, they also become vulnerable when it's no longer present. Maybe the experience with a friendly AI companion lulls people against skepticism about the mistakes and failures that we know AI commits. AI tools also make it very easy for governments to amplify their messages precisely at a time when conventional journalism is very fragile. News reporting has always been the handmaiden of democracy, informing voters, holding people in power accountable. Yet in recent decades, newspapers and professional media rapidly declining. Financial crises face news industry largely because readers and advertising have migrated to social media platforms. And meantime, predictive algorithms deployed by social media and generative AI circulate conspiracy theories, hateful views based on data used for training. AI incorporated into social media platforms optimized to keep the reader scrolling, exploit human curiosity and outrage. It's the rubbernecking effect. You keep reading when it's something outrageous. And they refine the personal targeting of content while producing growing doubts about the reliability of any information. Because AI pulls information from internet websites for its training, the models are particularly vulnerable to malign actors that want to manipulate through their training. Very depressing insight from my daughter, who is an editor. She says that the copy editing services that are online used to link to a dictionary and to a grammar book, and now they link to the internet. And therefore, they predict the most common use, which has nothing to do with the accuracy. The parallel trends of authoritarianism and AI actually join forces as we speak, distributing propaganda and divisive messaging, sowing doubt about competing sources of information, crowding out human attention, destroying the business models for legacy journalism. AI use can advance the goals of authoritarians. Researchers documented that in 2023, leaders in 16 nations used AI deliberately to sow doubt, to smear opponents, or to influence public debate. And at least 43 nations that same year used AI to spread propaganda. The combination of authoritarian leaders and pervasive AI may make the warnings of writer Aldous Huxley come true. He warned that there will someday come a scientific dictator who would combine entertainment manipulation of people's thoughts to produce societies made up of people who love their servitude and never dream of revolution. Governments and employers alike use AI for surveillance, data collection, and control of human beings in ways that even Huxley didn't imagine. And they enlarge distrust. The human responses can spiral into alienation, despair, and aggression, and separate people. People turn to AI companions rather than to people. to answer questions like, how can I teach my child to ride a bicycle? Or how can I cook a special meal? Or how should I make a tough decision? And AI reduces the time it takes to write a seemingly personal note to family members or coworkers. A child I know told me in a tone combining disappointment and scorn that he can tell when his dad sends a note through AI rather than personally. But people doing this are not spending the time building social bonds, and isolation makes people vulnerable to manipulation and recruitment by authoritarian leaders. In 1880, Fyodor Dostoevsky wrote The Brothers Karamazov. How many people have read The Brothers Karamazov? One character tells the story about the Grand Inquisitor. You remember the Grand Inquisitor? In the story, Jesus has returned to Earth at the time of the Spanish Inquisition, only to be arrested, imprisoned, and sentenced to death by the Inquisition's leaders. And the Grand Inquisitor visits the incarcerated Jesus and asserts that most people cannot deal with the freedom given to them. The Inquisitor asserts, freedom, free reason, science will lead people into such a maze and confront them with such miracles and insoluble mysteries that some of them, unruly and ferocious, will exterminate themselves. Others, unruly and feeble, will exterminate each other. And the remaining third, feeble and wretched, will crawl to our feet and cry out to us. Dostoevsky. People must be relieved of the burdens of freedom in exchange for chains and bread, or else they will face destruction and death. The Grand Inquisitor proclaims that the Catholic Church alleviated the most fundamental, tormenting questions of the soul by teaching people to blindly obey. Autocratic leaders in generative AI seem to reenact the Grand Inquisitor's story, so what are concerned people to do? Halting authoritarian government, unfortunately, requires the very kind of independence, resistance, and critical thought that authoritarian leaders and AI disable. There are lessons to learn from the past. My colleague, Professor Erica Chenoweth at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, looked at the Philippines' ouster of the Marcos regime in 1986, and the 2003 rejection of Eduard Shevardnadze in the nation of Georgia, and concluded that nonviolent protests by people engaged in massive protests are twice as likely to succeed as armed conflicts. This is the research behind the now widely circulating conclusion that mass demonstrations or marches that reach a threshold of 3.5% of a population bring about change, even in the face of authoritarian regimes. I admire and try to learn from this kind of work and detailed strategies recommended by learned groups for specific reforms to bolster faltering democratic institutions. But I'm worried about the lack of political will to take up any of these suggestions. Maybe bottom-up solutions, maybe starting with cities and towns and states, maybe we will see the strengthening of self-governance, new institutions and coalitions. But the work ahead is daunting. I'm strangely more hopeful about AI. There are no good historical analogs to the current AI risks, but it's still in early stages, and it reflects design choices that can be altered. And perhaps that makes AI more tractable, but it requires human beings to exert action and responsibility. There are steps for individuals to take that are already circulating widely. We should all moderate our AI usage. We should be vigilant in detecting unreliable responses. To guard against the induced dependence from AI sycophancy, its seductive power, its interference with our capabilities, we should phrase our prompts differently. We should say we're asking for a friend, not for ourselves. So there's less likelihood of integrating with personal information that manipulates us. We should instruct the model to omit language suggesting remorse or apology. Stop telling me that you're sorry. And we should also instruct the models to say, I don't know, when they don't know. Now, doesn't mean that they'll do it. We should use the features that allow us to customize feedback, and we should ask for brutal feedback rather than complements. And we should switch across AI chatbots to get multiple perspectives. We should demand evidence and explicit names of sources used in response to questions. We should check and never rely on an answer without checking to see whether it's real. Don't add to these embarrassing examples of lawyers and judges with hallucinated sources. We should ration our use of AI assistants and companions or refuse to use them at all. We should look to self-help and commercial enterprises that urge individuals to maintain personal AI hygiene. That's an actual phrase. And AI itself could be used to nudge people to healthy uses and give priority to tools that enhance rather than quell or substitute for human thinking, critiquing, and creating. But all of these are retail. They're not wholesale approaches. These are all putting the burden on end users, on us. So what could ensure AI develops differently, develops to enhance rather than substitute for human capabilities? Maintaining personal AI hygiene will not change the course of AI development, but publicly expressed criticisms and collective pressure can lead even private companies to change course. OpenAI has made changes in response to critiques and modified ChatGPT. Pressure can also produce regulation in those jurisdictions that are willing and able to take action. For now, it's not the United States, but Canada. Canada, we're counting on you. Priorities for change include preventing AI exploitation of human vulnerabilities to flattery, manipulation, and outrage. And to address this sycophancy by AI chatbots, there's a priority to press the use of higher quality training data and further fine-tuning and opportunities for users to say, don't do that to me. The current models, frankly, may need to be trashed and built anew to truly address some of the problems. Legal reforms could hold AI companies responsible for harms under even existing criminal laws, consumer protection laws, fraud laws, but none of this will happen without human beings demanding change. Take a page from history. Social movements, economic boycotts, civil society, join Team Humanity, press for the development of technology that benefits human beings. Require easy ways to opt out of AI tools, to disclose when the AI tool is being used, to track and disclose its impact on jobs, on environment, on energy consumption. Make it easy for community members to participate when governments adopt AI tools. We don't do that right now. That'd be very helpful. Consider alternatives to AI music curation by Spotify. There's emerging platforms that are led by artists and listeners that focus on enhancing engagement and creativity. Some people are even going offline and reclaiming physical discs and records to avoid the streaming services. Digital tools could be designed to enhance human curiosity rather than to dull those qualities. Will Wright was the game developer who invented Spore. Has anyone ever done Spore or SimCity? No? Well, he recognized that early days of video games were all congregated in one area, all doing first-person shooters. And he thought, this is such a waste. So he developed an interactive game that allows people to make creatures that evolve, to shape evolution, and engage in imagination and philosophic thinking. There could be similar hunger for tools to assist collaborations among people who know each other or who don't know each other. And collaboration could actually be extraordinary. A decade ago, that's what AI developers were trying to do. But they've gone a different direction now because they can make money faster doing something else. AI could be designed to counter hate propagated by digital communications. One experimental study shows that participants are more willing to engage in countering hate speech when there are examples of counter speech also included. And initial efforts in Taiwan point to AI that can counter threats to reliable public information. I think the people so talented to create deep fakes, they should be challenged to create detection of deep fakes. Companies organized for short-term profit should not be the sole deciders for AI's course. Universities and philanthropies have roles to play. Build tools that extend human capabilities rather than subduing them. Just yesterday, a group of 10 foundations launched an initiative called Humanity AI with an initial commitment of $500 million to advance greater opportunity for people and communities by increasing human agency and shaping AI. Now, it's true, one company alone, Microsoft, invested more than $10 billion in its AI investment in 1 year. So this may seem like small change, but it's a good start. And philanthropy and universities could do something more. We could build alternatives and show people it could be different. We could build AI companions that help people deal with constructive friction and with people who disagree with them, in getting feedback, in turning off electronics. Some researchers are already working along these lines. So I'd say to students and faculty, why don't we develop a grading curve to grade the companies on their responsiveness to human needs and ethical deployment? Audit committees of publicly traded companies, why don't they become target audiences for the risks that their companies are creating? We can all do our part and remember that the direction of technological development is selected by human beings, and we could push for something better. Pushing for something better is not just in search of something vague like ethics. It's also to deal with the counterproductive effects. Scholars Darren Esamoglu and Simon Johnson observe that AI automating tasks in ways that ignore human capabilities is a self-fulfilling prophecy because, and these are their words, automation decisions can gradually reduce the scope for social interaction and human learning. Would you want treatment by doctors and nurses trained by screens rather than taught to work with real people? Surely there's a way to do both. AI and autocratic governance take away human agency gradually. We need to resist. Maybe there are even ways that AI can strengthen democracy. It can synthesize and make sense of comments from more numbers of people than can meet in one room. It can facilitate deliberation by human beings. The Center for Constructive Communication at MIT, Massachusetts Institute for Technology, has very striking projects in this direction, assisting cities and communities. And there are promising initiatives to deepen inclusive and deliberative governance in Taiwan, in California, and here in Canada. There are 3 pathways ahead of us. The first is passivity, accepting political and AI authoritarianism as inevitable. And with democratic norms, dissent, and laws rapidly breaking, it seems AI saturating the globe, it seems that there's no other course, but that's an illusion. That's the Grand Inquisitor speaking. That's not reality. There's a second path that frankly may only be available to a small minority of people. People who can reap short-term financial, social, or political benefits by joining the AI trend and increasing its convergence with the destruction of human freedom and rights. They can take disappointments around past democratic leaders as a reason to throw support to technology's current path. And they can pretend to be in control. If the tech bros and other investors recognize themselves in this description, they should. They are enabling a decline in human freedom. And I think that this second path is an illusion. It will collapse into the first one. But there's a third path. You know, there's always got to be a third one. Or at least I insist on believing that we can forge one. Taking this path means honoring the ideals of individual rights and dignity, the ideals of democracy, engaging in political and legal, psychological, and organizing efforts. And it requires work. It requires protests and experiments and education. And it means resisting distractions. And it means caring to separate the real from the fake and getting reliable information and asking, where is this information from? And how do you know? And what about peer review? and let's support real news. The third way won't happen unless people persistently ask these and other hard questions. You've heard me maintain here that people in universities have special opportunities and obligations to take this road, and I believe that's true. And we, as human beings, have faced terrible times in the past. It's tempting to say that these times are unprecedented. Whether they are or not, we can do some learning from the past and imagine the future. Science fiction is not a bad place to look. Frederick Douglass was a man who escaped chattel slavery in the United States. He taught himself to read. He invented his life as a global anti-slavery advocate. And he has some lessons to teach us. 6 years before Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, liberating enslaved African Americans and changing the facts on the ground in the middle of the American Civil War, Douglass said this, and I quote him, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And those will continue till they are resisted with either words or blows or both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress." The third test is the test of our endurance. It's the test of our commitments to justice, to freedom, to caring and action. And I'll close just with words from a poet, William Stafford, who said, "Though we could fool each other, we should consider, lest the parade of our mutual life get lost in the dark. For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes or no, or maybe, should be clear. The darkness around us is deep." Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you. This was such a classic Martha Minow, right? A tour de force. So thank you for raising these exceptionally difficult issues, but you saw doing them with literature, with one caricature. You had
The cartoon.
the cartoon there. And of course, raising some of these toughest issues for us to explore. So I would actually want Martha to open our discussion, first of all, by thanking you for, I think, the gist of your talk, of your lecture, the idea of looking together at AI and the democratic decline or the rise of authoritarian regimes is really illuminating, right? It's not necessarily intuitive to do
Right.
that, but I think it's really powerful. And you've done such a great job in terms of elaborating why we
Thank you.
should think about the two together.
Thank you.
And I think the way that you presented it was in some way the most depressing version thereof. That is,
Sorry.
no, I'm not suggesting it's not true. I'm just suggesting that you had lots of qualifications. So just for the sake of discussion, to some extent, the way that you describe both trends they're not necessarily causally linked, but they're definitely going in the same direction, especially in reference to human agency, passivity, and the concern about our ability to resist, to be critical, to use our agency. And the question I have for you, and it's a little bit, it was sort of a direction that you partly took and then you sort of turned back, was whether you can see potentially actually in some way AI assisting in the fight against authoritarianism, because they might go in the same direction. They might work in
Right.
countering direction. So if yes, what I think you've given us a lot of ideas about how individually we might resist in terms of the social activism, but could you connect that to some of the work that you did? And I
Right.
know you've been doing this for a number of years now. And I think if you were able to find that key, that would be really quite significant. So I think I want to start there. And then I have another question for you. And for people in the audience, if you have questions, we have the cards which are being passed around. So you're most welcome to get those to me up here in the front. So Martha, thank you again. This is just
Thank
so
you.
incredibly rich. So I'm just picking one
No,
thread.
thank you for picking out that thread. And you're right, I only gestured towards it. I've been doing work with this group I mentioned that's at Massachusetts Institute for Technology, the Center for Constructive Communication. Leave it to academics to come up with a rather pretentious name, but I actually am quite impressed with them. So what they have done is they have put the sense-making capability of AI to work on conversations that people have in communities where people trust one another. And you know that we talk differently when we're in a community where you trust one another than we do in another community. And then entirely with the consent of the participants, they have shared some of that sense-making activity and some of the individual quotations with other communities. And then they have actually worked together on some agenda setting and other kinds of tools that political scientists know about, but they use AI to do it, to do things like in one town in Michigan, bring people together in selecting who the new sheriff should be. In my city of Boston, they use this tool to actually meet with people in their own communities about what they wanted from the mayor. And then they actually came up with a much richer set of criteria for the political process than we'd had before. So I'm encouraged by that. You know, Taiwan is the country I know that has done the most with trying to deploy AI to enhance democratic, participatory, inclusive activity. I think the jury's out, but I'm interested in it. You know, the ancients thought you could not have a democracy in a size of a group that couldn't meet together. Maybe AI will change that.
That's fascinating. I actually really like that. And I also want to pick up on your, actually the arc of the end of the talk, right? Because you have given us, again, this is very classic for those of you who have not met Professor Minow, really just giving us the lay of the land and all the complexities, but not stopping there. I really like that you also took that last step of saying, all right, is there anything that we might be able to do? And those are the three alternatives I'm just going to remind you. So the first was the most depressing one, right? We are all just basically going to submit to both authoritarian regimes and the kind of elements of AI that might make us I think especially your adolescent and your, the young people. And we know this from teachers, right? We hear this all the time, that they are exceptionally worried about the inability to develop critical thinking, not because people don't have the ability, it's just so much easier not to exercise it. And I think your example, right, of the young student who was asked what was the prompt, someone who believed
Someone
in her.
believed in you, and
and she wasn't
doesn't know
able
the
to actually
answer.
come up with an answer.
Yeah.
She felt she had to turn to AI, and then she couldn't do that. She turned to Google, so there was, of course, this is an extreme example, but just to show that concern. So that's the perfect merger, actually, of these two trends, right? The greater use of AI or dependency on in this level of these examples, plus the concern about the kind of democratic decline that we have seen. And I think that was the Grand Inquisitor, right?
Grand Inquisitor, yeah.
So that's option one. Hopefully not many people in the room are attracted to that. I think the second one is, if you have the kind of training, right? Perhaps some of your CS students who were in that class, or some people who do sophisticated math, right? Just join the trend, join the AI bubble, and you might become.
And think they can control it.
Right, very, very, you're right. Think that they can control it, might not be impacted by it, and also maybe thinking that it's not up to each individual to make the choice of whether not thinking about the societal impact, because that might be actually a way of taming through option two, just to say, sure, use your brain, your creativity, but there are much broader impacts. And I think people probably would just delegate. They would say, oh, that's for the government or for the university or for civil society, right? So perhaps even insert that element of individual responsibility or societal responsibility placed back on those, on the many creative people who are now actually creating the AI boom. But that was sort of number two. And you said, to begin with, it's a very, very small subset of the population. The third one was to me, the most attractive, right? Which was the question of what can we do? Is there a way to resist? And I think there, instead of asking you about AI as I did in my first question, I actually want to go back to the authoritarian element, because I do think, and you mentioned this in your talk, but I do feel, and this is now having been south of the border for a while now, I was actually utterly surprised by the kind of self-censorship that people are just engaged in, right? It's a deep, deep fear that in some way, if they resist, something terrible would happen to them. It's even hard to actually grasp what that something terrible would be. And if that is the case in one of the greatest democracies, you know, with all of its issues, still it's the United States. I want to ask you about that. If you share that sentiment, and if that is the case, how in the world could we tackle that, right? Because if people are fearful, if they feel that they would pay some kind of a personal cost, then in some way, the kind of autocratic trend has already won. So I really want to get a sense of your, first, the temperature, if you share that kind of intuition. And secondly, if that is the case, what in the world could be done? Even just demonstrations, there aren't so many people out in the streets, right? Like even the classic, like you have to look around the world to see it. You don't necessarily see it in DC. You don't see it in many other parts of the United States.
Next weekend, there are going to be organized protests. But, you know, I'm a lawyer. I've watched law firms that I admire collapse and concede to demands from the president that aren't even specific, and it's shocking. But then I've also seen some resist and go to court and win. And so I think that there's a kind of maybe a break in the hypnotism as people see, oh, actually, if you stand up, not only you can survive, but you can win. You know, the jury's out on this one too. But I can't help but note another course I teach a course on nonprofit organizations. And the week that OpenAI was converting from being a nonprofit to a for-profit was the gift that kept on giving. I was teach it in my nonprofits class, teach it in my AI class. I think that I regret not having studied more about corporate form, because the form affects accountability enormously. And that shift is one that we have to keep watching. That's why I end in the talk talking about universities and nonprofits and philanthropies. There's a different structure, different accountability, different, you know, time frame. It's not quarterly returns. And those of us who have any connection with these alternative forms should use them. And that's, I think, essential for the freedom that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's actually such a great point, and it's really, really accurate.
You know, the law firms that collapsed, I mean, I know these people. You know, why did they do it? What I can tell you is that for many of them, they were told that their clients would leave because their clients would be barred from doing business with the government. It's not the law firms that do business with the government, it's their clients. So then the question is, well, why did they become so dependent on those particular clients? And what was the business model that made private equity more significant than litigation? And again, the form, and what's the profit model? And if you're the lead partner and you have 1,000 people working for you and they will be out of work, of course you have to think hard about what to do. But Elaine Scarry, who is a professor of English at Harvard, she wrote a wonderful book called How to Think in an Emergency. And I can summarize the book to you in one word or two words. You can't think in an emergency. So her whole point of the book is you have to think in advance. You have to come up in advance with what are you going to do. And I just want to connect here. That means with whom are you in solidarity, and what structures are you involved in that will determine whether or not you have any degrees of freedom.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely crucial. And it's true that luckily in most societies, at least freer societies, you would have a variation of not just the corporate form. You would have other universities, civil society, other potential sources of of pushing back. So I think that's actually a really, really significant point. And also, I think some of the law firms at the end lost their clients, right? So maybe they lost
No
other
question
clients,
about it.
right?
And they're losing the future
right, the
law
talented,
students who don't
right.
want to go work there.
So in some way, maybe that's actually an optimistic story to say
Yeah.
there was sometimes actually conceding or not pushing back would hurt you. That actually might be really
Yeah.
a lesson, or at least add another layer of consideration. So we have a couple of questions. We're not going to be able to get all of them because we have quite a few, but I want to show this to Martha and then I'll show it to all of you. That's going to be our first question from the audience. So you can show it to everyone.
Can AI be your friend? Wow.
And
What
the
do you
question is,
think?
what do
Join
you
us for a
think?
panel
So this is actually
on
really
techno
sweet.
philosophy. Wow.
So thank you. I don't know who put it out there, but so can AI be your friend? And that really is a question to Professor Minow. What do you think?
J.K. Rowling has in one of her Harry Potter books the line that don't trust anything where you can't see where it keeps its brain. And that's pretty good advice. We have these tragic circumstances. We know at least one young person who committed suicide after relying on the AI companion. So no. And Mark Zuckerberg, who we could spend a whole lot of time on, but I'm not going to. But Mark Zuckerberg, who founded, Facebook, that is now Meta, he said they're not this problem of isolation. He sees it, the same one that I pointed to, the one that Hannah Arendt traced to the recruitment to join the Nazis. He said the solution is we're going to create AI companions. I don't think that's the solution. I think it's, turn the thing off and make some friends. That would be the solution I'd recommend.
Okay, wonderful. We have literally 7 minutes and I don't know how many questions. So maybe I'll ask you one. You can get, a quick answer and then we
Okay.
might be able to fit another one. But hopefully for other people in the room and the online questions, we just apologize. We have way too many questions, but hopefully that means that you found this to be quite generative in terms of your thinking. So here's one question for you. I see two goals in tension: a need to make AI better and a need to get offline to preserve our humanity. You see, in a way, you sort of
That's
answer
true.
that, but this was, but I want to ask, the question is, do we need to use AI better or less? And if the former, are there areas of life which should always stay analog? So this is
such
really
a good
inviting you.
question.
Yeah.
Such a good question. I think the answer is both. We need to use it less and use it better and be quite deliberate about when we're using it and for what, and even use it to help us get off it.
Okay, wonderful. That was a very, very succinct answer. So I actually want to ask you another question, which again, most of them are AI, but perhaps this is partly just the audience that we drew. This question is suggesting that humans are also prone to some of the errors that you mentioned.
Totally, totally.
When discussing the AI. So I guess the question is, if your first one is, I can almost answer this for Professor Minow, are you equally critical of humans if they were to make the same mistakes? I would say 100% yes, especially if it's discriminatory, etc.
Yes.
But I guess the second follow-up question was, do we want AI to be perfect, or do we want it to be more like us, I guess, like us humans?
Wow. That's very philosophic. I mean, I'm not sure I have an answer to that at this point, but I guess I would say this: the illusion of perfection is the bigger danger. The illusion that they are knowledgeable, the illusion that they are thinking, and that they have a personality and that they care about us. And I think that, one of the major dangers of this moment in the world, that we never really have had anything quite like this, is that we are walking down the street with people who don't live in the same reality that we do. And that's really, really hard to overcome, because we get different information, because we are seeing different kinds of content. This is an anecdote that's a little dated, but I'll share it anyway. Some undergraduates at the University of Chicago spent a semester and created a way that when you're getting news, you could get something that's diametrically opposed. And I'm sure that the students at the University of Chicago are very smart, but I don't think they're smarter than the engineers in Silicon Valley. They did this in one semester for no pay. The question is, why are we spending literally billions of dollars to develop technologies that deny people a shared reality or even an exposure to what other people are thinking? And so insist on seeing what other people are thinking.
Yeah, I think that's actually so significant, and especially in a university setting, right? That has been a real concern, that people find it difficult to have difficult conversations, because if you engage in a difficult conversation, inevitably you will find that someone might say something that you have either never heard or disagree with. And I guess what we are for the university, I would say our aspiration should be to build that sufficient trust that we could actually have these conversations in a respectful way. It's a very, very demanding challenge, but as you said, institutionally, that might be our kind of specialty and ability to intervene.
No, I agree. And as you say, there are forces that are causing people to be scared right now that we just have to overcome. But before Trump came on the scene and before these current forces, Sherry Turkle, who's a social scientist at MIT, she reported, based on MIT undergrads, disproportionately engineers, that they preferred asynchronous education, communication. They preferred texting. Rather than being face to face and have, and why? She would follow up, because then they had to deal with somebody. They had to deal with someone's reactions, and they didn't feel competent to do that. So, are people imperfect? Absolutely, but we get better, and we get better if you do it and you practice it. And that kind of emotional self-regulation and learning to deal with the lack of predictability, that not only do you have to do that to get along with other people, that's where some of the great magic of human connection happens. So turn it off.
If we are to have a society, we need to have that ability. So we have 2 more minutes, or do you want us to close? Oh, so no, 1 more minute. We shouldn't then ask another question, because all of the questions that we have are extremely complicated. So maybe if you have a minute, you can come up to us. But if not, I would just want to thank Professor Minow. I know Janice Stein, our founding director, is going to do it momentarily, but really, Martha, this was brilliant. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you so much. It's great.
So let me add my thanks to what Martha Minow gave us tonight. So much to think about, a lot to challenge. But the intersection of authoritarianism and technology is not a new problem. As you well know better than anyone, it's something that preoccupied Hannah Arendt in a very, very deep way. And I loved the origin story from Socrates, that writing was going to wreck our brains. People would lose their memories and would lose their capacity to speak if there was writing. And it's a wonderful story because it puts in context a 5,000-year-old concern with what technology does to the human spirit, the mind, the brain. The other great stories, which Martha knows very well, is what happened when the printing press was invented. And oh my God, the authoritarians were beside themselves, because all of a sudden there was no longer a monopoly on who could read. And when there's not a monopoly on who could read, there's no longer a monopoly on who could interpret. And that one they actually got right. That was the technology, because that's what the printing press was. It was a technology that deeply undermined authoritarian control. So I think the challenge for us, and we have this challenge in every age, this comes back in a new form. It's not a new one, this great word transmogrifies into something that we didn't expect it to be. And so the challenge for us is, how do we use the new technologies in ways that undermine authoritarianism rather than reinforce it. And that's the agenda you laid out for us today. And there are opportunities, but I think if we leave the room with take it back and turn it off, which was your last comment, especially for those of us who are parents of young children, parents of adolescents. I'm looking at my friend there, grandparents with young children. Take it back and turn it off is a wonderful shorthand memo for reclaiming our own agency and our capacity to shape our political future at what Professor Minow rightly identifies as a really deeply worrying time, especially in your country. You know, we in Canada long admired and frankly cherished your country. So let me conclude by saying you have our absolutely best wishes. And you are always welcome here.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
very, very much.
Thank you.